Um, so, picture this. You are standing right in the middle of the pharmacy aisle.
Oh, yeah. The absolute worst place to be when you're sick.
Right. I mean, you have this terrible chest-rattling cough that has been keeping you awake for, I don't know, 3 days straight. Your head is pounding, your throat is completely raw.
And you were just staring at this massive, brightly colored wall of syrups and gels and pills.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And every single box seems to be shouting a different, totally confusing acronym at you. Like you see DM on one box, then you see expectorant on another, or antitussive.
Which is just a great word, right? So
Yeah.
clinical.
It really is. And you're just standing there completely overwhelmed. And honestly, you just want the hacking to stop so you can finally get like a single hour of uninterrupted sleep.
Yeah, it's the universal sick day experience. You are basically forced to make these highly nuanced pharmacological decisions when you're functioning on zero sleep and feeling your absolute worst.
Which is a terrible combination.
It really is. And, you know, the packaging on those boxes doesn't exactly offer a clear biochemistry lesson to help you out either.
No, it definitely doesn't. And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to decode that pharmacy aisle once and for all.
I love it.
We are diving deep into the pharmacology of antitussives and expectorants. Because here is the genuinely wild part that most people don't realize. These are two completely distinct categories of drugs. They are sold right next to each other, marketed to treat the exact same symptom, a cough, but they do complete opposites.
Right. They're entirely opposed in their biological intent. I mean, one strategy attempts to shut the cough reflex down completely, and the other strategy actually tries to make the cough more productive.
Okay, let's unpack this. Over the next few minutes, we're going to explore how these drugs literally hijack your nervous system.
It gets pretty sci-fi.
It really does. And we are going to uncover a shocking historical timeline involving, honestly, one of the biggest, most catastrophic pharmaceutical blunders of all time.
Oh, absolutely. The history is mind-blowing.
And finally, we're going to answer the ultimate, slightly uncomfortable question. Do these over-the-counter medicines actually do anything at all?
Yeah, it's a surprisingly dramatic story for a sticky cherry-flavored syrup you can buy for $8 at the grocery store.
Right.
But to understand how a drug stops a cough, we first have to understand how a cough happens in the first place. I mean, a cough isn't a disease itself. It's a protective reflex.
Right. It's your body's emergency response system basically screaming, get this out of my lungs right now.
Exactly. So let's look at the actual reflex arc. You have these specialized stretch receptors and these bare, highly sensitive nerve endings. They are called unmyelinated C fibers, and they're embedded all throughout the lining of your airway.
Okay.
And they are constantly on the lookout for anything that doesn't belong there. That could be mechanical irritation like inhaling dust or a swallowed crumb or even just a buildup of mucus.
Like when you accidentally breathe in a little bit of water and just start hacking?
Oh, right, exactly. Or it could be chemical irritation like stomach acid from reflux or even the inflammatory chemicals your own immune system releases when you have a virus.
Okay, so if we think about the lungs like a house, these airway receptors are essentially the motion sensors on the windows and doors.
Oh, that is a perfect way to look at it. Yes. So when an irritant trips those motion sensors, they generate an electrical signal.
The alarm is tripped.
Right. And that alert travels up the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve acts like the house's internal wiring, carrying the message straight up to a highly specific cough center in the brainstem. Specifically in the medulla.
Okay, so the brainstem is essentially the main control panel for the whole house.
Exactly.
The motion sensors in the lungs detect an intruder. They send the signal through the wiring, and it hits the central security panel in the brain.
And if that incoming alert is deemed urgent enough, the control panel fires back.
Right.
It sends an outgoing motor command down the phrenic nerve to your diaphragm, your rib muscles, and your abdominal muscles.
Then the alarm physically goes off.
It happens in 3 distinct, incredibly coordinated phases. First, you take this deep inhalation. Second, you snap your vocal cords shut, that's the closed glottis, while your respiratory muscles contract violently.
Which I imagine builds up a ton of pressure.
Immense pressure in your chest. And then third, your vocal cords suddenly open, resulting in just an explosive release of air. And that mechanism, that whole sequence, is the cough.
Wow. So if I'm standing in that pharmacy aisle and I just want the alarm to stop ringing so I can finally sleep, which part of the system do these medications actually target? I mean, do they cut the wires? Do they smash the motion sensors?
Well, it depends entirely on which box you pick up. So let's start with antitussives.
Okay.
The word literally translates to against cough. These are the suppressors. They are specifically designed for dry, non-productive, hacking coughs.
Like the kind where you aren't actually clearing any mucus from your airway. You are just irritating your throat over and over.
Exactly. And within the antitussive category, drug makers use two completely different strategies. First, you have the central antitussives. The most common ones you'll see on the shelf are dextromethorphan, which is the DM on your cough syrup bottle, and codeine.
Okay, so where do those central antitussives intercept the home security system?
They go straight for the control panel. Central antitussives act directly on that cough center in the medulla.
Oh, so they act on the brainstem itself.
Right. They don't sever the wiring from the lungs. The alert signals are still coming in from the chest. Instead, they raise the threshold of the control panel itself. They chemically alter the brainstem so it becomes much less willing to convert that incoming alert into an outgoing cough command.
So it basically takes a much stronger intruder to trigger the alarm.
Precisely.
Which honestly explains why taking a really heavy dose of DM makes you feel a bit groggy and disconnected. I mean, you aren't just flipping a magical cough switch. You are actively dampening electrical signaling in your brainstem.
Yeah, you are literally turning down the volume on broad networks of the brain. But there's a second strategy in this category: peripheral antitussives. The standard prescription option here is a drug called benzonatate.
Okay, so if the first strategy targets the brain, how does the peripheral strategy work?
Well, benzonatate is actually structurally related to local anesthetics, like the kind of numbing agents a dentist might use, like tetracaine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you swallow it as a small capsule, it dissolves in your stomach, enters your bloodstream, and gets pumped out into circulation. And when it reaches the tissues of your lungs and airways, it acts locally. It essentially numbs the stretch receptors themselves.
Oh, wow. So it literally sprays foam on the motion sensors.
Basically, yeah.
The control panel in the brain is still working perfectly fine, but the
50.
sensors in the lungs are completely blind to the irritation. This is a really fascinating way to bypass the brain entirely.
It is, and it's fundamentally why benzonatate doesn't produce the sedation or the cognitive fog that you often get from dextromethorphan or codeine, because the drug is working its magic down in the chest cavity, not up in the central nervous system.
That makes total sense.
Hmm.
But if I have a wet cough where I'm actively coughing up junk,
Yeah.
I imagine that turning off the alarm system while the intruder's still in the house is a terrible idea.
Oh, it is completely counterproductive. Suppressing a wet cough just traps those sticky, infected secretions down in your airway, which can lead to pneumonia or just much worse infections.
Yikes. So what do we do instead?
That is where the second category comes in: expectorants. They target the mucus itself rather than the nervous system's reflex arc. And the absolute dominant player on the market here is a drug called guaifenesin.
Guaifenesin, okay.
Yeah, if you see a product marketed to break up chest congestion, guaifenesin is usually the active ingredient.
So it's the mover. If the antitussive is the suppressor, the expectorant is the mover.
Exactly. The pharmacological theory behind guaifenesin is that it increases the total volume of your respiratory tract secretions while simultaneously reducing their viscosity.
Wait, so it actually makes more mucus?
Yes, but watery mucus. The logic is pretty straightforward. Thin, watery mucus is significantly easier for your body to clear out than thick, sticky sludge. By making the cough more productive, your airway clears faster, and ideally, the coughing fits eventually stop because the irritant is actually gone.
Got it. You're basically watering down the sludge in the pipe so they can finally flush clear.
What's fascinating here is that there is an even more aggressive cousin to the expectorant called a mucolytic. We should distinguish these two. A really common mucolytic is acetylcysteine, often just called NAC.
Okay, how is that different from watering down the pipes?
Well, while guaifenesin just encourages your body to hydrate the mucus, NAC directly attacks the structural integrity of the mucus that already exists. It chemically severs the disulfide bonds that cross-link the proteins into a thick gel.
Oh, wow. It's like pouring liquid drain cleaner down a sink.
Yeah.
You are chemically dissolving the clog rather than just trying to flush it out with more water.
It is mechanically very distinct. It's often used in hospital settings for severe mucus plugging in conditions like cystic fibrosis. And as a quick kind of bizarre medical aside, NAC is also used as the exact life-saving antidote for a Tylenol or acetaminophen overdose.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's the exact same molecule doing two wildly different jobs in two completely different organ systems.
A chemical multi-tool. I love when pharmacology overlaps like that. But let's return to the central antitussives for a minute.
Sure.
The ones that work by altering the brainstem's control panel. Because anytime you start messing around with brainstem thresholds, you open the door to massive risks. And you mentioned codeine earlier as a common central antitussive. Codeine is literally an opioid.
It is, and the entire history of cough suppression is completely inseparable from the history of opium. Back in 1832, a French chemist named Pierre Robiquet was attempting to purify morphine from opium. And during his experiments, he managed to isolate a second, slightly milder compound, riding along with the morphine. He discovered methylmorphine, which we now know as codeine.
And the medical community realized pretty quickly that this new compound stopped a cough in its tracks, right?
It was an absolute revelation for doctors at the time. Codeine suppressed the cough reflex at doses well below what was needed for severe pain relief. So by the late 19th century, it was the default undisputed cough treatment across Europe and the United States.
But because it is an opioid, it carries the inherent risks of severe physical dependence, respiratory depression, and euphoria.
Right. People were getting heavily addicted to their cough medicine, which leads us to a massive turning point in the 1890s.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
It really does. This is arguably one of the most consequential, catastrophic failures in the history of drug development.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, so a major German pharmaceutical company called Bayer saw the massive global market for codeine cough syrup. They wanted to totally dominate that market. So they tasked their chemists with finding a synthetic alternative that maintained the cough-suppressing power but eliminated the addiction risk.
A noble goal, in theory.
Right. So in 1897, a Bayer chemist named Heinrich Dresser was testing a compound that had actually been synthesized a few decades earlier. The chemical name was diacetylmorphine. Dresser's team ran some tests, they loved the preliminary results, and they decided to aggressively market it as the world's first safe, non-addictive substitute for codeine.
Wow. They genuinely thought they'd cured the opioid addiction problem. What did they end up calling this miracle drug?
They branded it heroin.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, they derived the name from the German word heroisch, meaning heroic, because they actually believed the drug's effects were heroic. In 1898, Bayer launched heroin explicitly as an over-the-counter cough remedy.
Over-the-counter? You could just casually walk into a pharmacy and buy heroin for a tickle in your throat?
You absolutely could. And they didn't just market it to adults. They heavily promoted heroin in children's cough syrups, claiming it was perfectly safe for pediatric respiratory issues.
That is horrifying. I can only imagine the fallout from that.
The results were devastating. I mean, within just a few years, the addiction epidemic it sparked became entirely undeniable. A drug that was launched specifically to solve the addiction problem of its predecessor turned out to be dramatically more addictive and destructive itself. By 1924, the United States Congress had banned heroin outright.
It is staggering to think about. A completely self-inflicted global public health disaster, all because humans just wanted a way to stop coughing at night.
Exactly.
So heroin is obviously a disastrous bust. Codeine is still highly addictive. How did chemists finally navigate away from opioids to give us the DM in our modern cough syrups?
Well, the catastrophic failure of heroin forced chemists to completely rethink their approach. They realized they needed a molecule that could travel to the brainstem and block the cough reflex without binding to the brain's opioid receptors at all.
A very tall order.
Very. But that desperate search eventually led to the synthesis of dextromethorphan in the 1950s. And the way they achieved it involves a really brilliant piece of molecular geometry. It is essentially a mirror image trick.
A mirror image trick? Do you mean like how my left hand and right hand are the exact same shape, but they can't perfectly overlap?
That is the exact principle. In chemistry, it's called chirality.
Chirality, okay.
Right. So there is a very potent codeine-like opioid called levomethorphan. It binds incredibly tightly to the brain's opioid receptors. Chemists took that exact molecule and synthesized its dextrorotatory, or right-handed, mirror image isomer. And that right-handed version is dextromethorphan.
I want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. It is literally the exact same chemical structure containing all the same atoms, just flipped backwards in a mirror, and suddenly it completely stops behaving like an opioid.
Yes.
That's like having a left-handed key that easily opens a lock, but when you forge a right-handed copy of the exact same key, it entirely fails to slide into the keyhole.
Exactly. The opioid receptors in your brain are the lock, and they will only accept the left-handed key. Because dextromethorphan is the right-handed key, it just bounces off those opioid receptors. Instead, it wanders off and works through a completely different mechanism. It binds to something called the NMDA receptor.
Oh, wow.
This gave the medical world exactly what it wanted. Strong antitussive activity with a fraction of the traditional opioid abuse risk. The FDA approved it in 1958, and it seemed like the crisis was finally solved.
But, just because you have cleverly bypassed the opioid receptor doesn't mean the drug is completely harmless. You are still introducing a synthetic chemical into the brain to alter its electrical signaling. Which brings us to the dark side of the modern dose. Because people eventually figured out how to abuse DXM too, right?
Oh, they absolutely did. While dextromethorphan isn't an opioid, if someone takes it at, say, 10 to 20 times the recommended therapeutic dose, it heavily blocks those NMDA receptors we just mentioned. And if we look at pharmacology, NMDA receptor blockade is the exact same mechanism used by powerful dissociative anesthetics like ketamine and PCP.
Wait, seriously. So if someone takes a massive dose of standard grocery store cough syrup, it isn't just going to make them incredibly sleepy. It is going to completely detach them from reality.
It produces a profound dissociative high. This led to a massive wave of recreational abuse among teenagers, famously nicknamed robo-tripping, which obviously comes from the brand name Robitussin. Teenagers began heavily targeting a very specific product, quercetin cough and cold tablets, which they refer to as triple Cs.
Okay, but if they wanted massive amounts of DXM, why seek out those specific pills? Why not just chug the liquid syrup?
It comes down to the other ingredients. Most liquid cough formulations contain strong decongestants or expectorants that act as a natural deterrent. If you drink a whole bottle, those extra ingredients will cause intensely uncomfortable side effects like severe, violent nausea or terrifying heart palpitations.
Right, your body just rejects it.
Exactly. But the triple C tablets lacked those specific deterrents, making it physically easier for someone to swallow massive, dangerous quantities of DXM at once. This widespread abuse is actually why many U.S. states now mandate strict age restrictions on DXM sales at the pharmacy counter.
So teenagers intentionally bypassing the recommended limits for a high is one danger. But what happens when your body bypasses the safety limits entirely by accident, just because of your DNA? Because this brings us to a terrifying modern revelation about codeine.
Yeah, this is one of the most vital, sobering lessons in modern pharmacogenomics. Codeine, strictly on its own, doesn't actually stop your cough very well. It is what we call a prodrug.
Meaning what, exactly?
That means the chemical you swallow is inactive. Your body has to metabolize it to unlock the active ingredient. Specifically, an enzyme in your liver called CRC2D6 intercepts the codeine and chemically converts it into morphine.
Morphine. So when you swallow a spoonful of codeine, your liver is basically acting as a tiny internal opioid factory.
That is biologically what is happening. Now here's where the massive danger lies. Human beings have vastly different genetics, which means our CYP2D6 enzymes work at wildly different speeds.
Okay.
A small percentage of the population are what geneticists call ultra-rapid metabolizers. Their livers process that codeine into morphine at an astonishingly fast, completely unregulated rate.
So if a doctor gives them a completely normal, standard dose of codeine?
Their liver instantly converts it into a massive, potentially lethal spike of morphine flooding their bloodstream.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Between 2013 and 2017, the FDA had to issue severe black box warnings and eventually strict contraindications against using codeine in children under 12. Multiple children had tragically died.
From a standard dose.
From a standard dose. Several of these fatalities occurred after very routine tonsillectomy or adenodectomy surgeries. The children were given standard, heavily researched pediatric doses of codeine to manage their post-surgery pain and coughing. But because they happened to be ultra-rapid metabolizers, that safe dose turned into a fatal morphine overdose.
I really want to emphasize the core misconception here. We generally assume that because a drug is sold over the counter, or because the prescribed dose is very small, that automatically equals safe.
Right. People equate accessibility with safety.
Exactly. But the tragedy in this codeine story isn't about the size of the dose written on the bottle. It is entirely about individual metabolic variability. The drug might be perfectly safe on average across 1 million people, but it acts as a deadly poison to a predictable genetic subset of the population.
It really forces us to step back and evaluate the entire category of cough medicine. I mean, we have antitussives and expectorants that carry very real risks. We have the history of the heroin disaster, the modern abuse of DXM, the genetic lottery of codeine overdoses.
And even just the danger of parents accidentally combining multiple overlapping multi-symptom liquids and double-dosing their toddlers, which caused massive FDA warnings back in 2007.
Exactly. All of this risk really begs the ultimate question.
Do they actually work?
Yeah.
I mean, we are taking on all of this risk, navigating a literal minefield of potential side effects and historical disasters. The payoff must be incredible to justify keeping them on the shelves, right?
You would logically assume so, but the modern scientific consensus is incredibly jarring. Over the past 2 decades, researchers have conducted a series of massive Cochrane systematic reviews.
And for context, a Cochrane review isn't just a single study, right?
Right. It is considered the absolute gold standard of evidence-based medicine, where researchers pool together all the rigorous data from every high-quality trial ever conducted on a topic. And looking at all the data spanning from the mid-2000s through the 2010s, they concluded repeatedly that there is no good evidence that over-the-counter cough medicines, including dextromethorphan and guaifenesin, are any more effective than a literal placebo for treating acute coughs in adults or children.
Wait. I have to stop you there.
I know, it's wild.
Are you telling me that after all of this, the Bayer heroin disaster, the brilliant mirror image chemistry, the brainstem hacking, these highly engineered pharmaceutical drugs do not reliably beat a sugar pill in clinical trials?
That is exactly what the data shows.
How is that even legally possible? How are they the most heavily purchased items in the entire pharmacy aisle if the FDA knows they don't work?
It comes down to a quirk of regulatory history. Drugs like guaifenesin survived historical FDA reviews way back in the 1970s and 80s. They were essentially grandfathered in.
Grandfathered in?
Yeah. During those decades, the FDA actually stripped away dozens of other expectorant ingredients for lack of evidence, and guaifenesin was just one of the last ones standing. But its historical approval was based largely on animal models and highly subjective, patient-reported outcomes.
And subjective reporting for a cold is incredibly flawed, right? Like if you take a cough syrup on day 3 of a cold and your immune system naturally clears the virus by day 5, you are going to give all the credit to the syrup, not your immune system.
Exactly why subjective reporting is no longer the standard. Guaifenesin's approval was not based on the crisp, objective, double-blind, randomized controlled trials that we strictly demand for approving new drugs today. If you speak to modern pulmonologists, many will plainly tell you that the physiological case for guaifenesin actually thinning mucus in a meaningful way is incredibly weak.
Hearing the phrase grandfathered in applied to the medicine you are putting inside your body is honestly terrifying.
Oh, for sure. And to really drive the efficacy point home, look at a famous 2007 clinical trial published in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine. Researchers wanted to rigorously test treatments for children's nighttime coughs.
Okay, what did they do?
They set up 3 randomized groups. One group received dextromethorphan, one group received absolutely no treatment at all, and one group received a single dose of plain dark honey.
A highly engineered brainstem suppressant versus nothing versus honey. What happened?
The parents systematically rated the plain honey as significantly more effective at relieving the severity of the cough and improving the child's sleep than both the dextromethorphan and the no treatment group.
The incredible irony of that result.
Yeah.
A literal kitchen cabinet remedy, just plain honey, outperformed a heavily regulated, synthetically derived pharmaceutical drug in a controlled, peer-reviewed trial.
It is pretty amazing.
That completely shatters the illusion we all hold that regulated medicine automatically means biologically superior.
It certainly challenges our assumptions. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean the drugs do absolutely zero chemically. The trial evidence might just be too sparse to capture a very minor clinical effect, but they simply do not reliably or meaningfully beat a comforting, placebo-like intervention.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We have journeyed from the motion sensor security system of your lungs to the Bayer heroin epidemic of the 1890s, to the genetic dangers of internal opioid factories, to the shocking truth about efficacy.
It's quite a ride.
The next time you are standing in that overwhelming pharmacy aisle, staring at those brightly colored boxes, you are armed with knowledge. You know how to decode the labels. You know that if you have a wet, productive cough, you absolutely should not grab an antitussive with DM on the box because you would be actively fighting against your own body's natural clearance mechanism.
Right, you'd be trapping the intruder inside.
Exactly. You know that expectorants and suppressants are fighting on opposite sides of the battlefield.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire saga is the perfect crash course in the reality of evidence-based medicine. It is a potent reminder that just because a product is widely sold and heavily marketed does not mean it is well proven.
Not at all.
But it also beautifully illustrates how medicine is a constantly self-correcting discipline. We see a problem, we research it, and we adjust. From pulling Bayer's heroin off the shelves a century ago to the FDA restricting codeine for children in 2017 based on our modern understanding of pharmacogenomics, the medical field is always evolving and learning.
Which leaves us with one final fascinating thought to chew on before we go. If rigorous modern clinical trials consistently show that these over-the-counter cough syrups barely outperform a placebo, yet millions and millions of people swear they feel vastly better and sleep deeper after taking a spoonful of thick, cherry-flavored syrup before bed, is it possible that the ritual of taking medicine, the profound psychological comfort of actively trying to heal yourself, is actually the most active ingredient in the bottle?